image that comes to mind for me when you think of the community is the likeness of a body, and that, like any body, that body has a head. And I think that our community is very blessed in terms of its thought leadership and in terms of its intellectuals and the people that are formulating and then articulating ideas and are leading conversations from that echelon, from that layer of leadership. Really, I think that our crisis is in a weak core as a community, that we have a very, very large body and a very large set of needs, but that body is not being supported by a strong core. And that strong core is people who, number one, have access to the scholars, have access to the thought leaders, but also have the wherewithal to be honest with them, honest enough to both challenge the ideas that they're teaching us. And when I say challenge, I mean from a place of respect and love, and to process those ideas in a very, very deep and real way, but to have those ideas, the rubber of those ideas meet the road of people's lived experience. There's some disparity between the set of needs and our ability to meet those needs. In terms of space in the Muslim community, right, the community is growing. In terms of content and people's desire for content, but also in terms of leadership and in terms of guidance. And I think that there is nomenclature does come in here, that when we're taking the traditional frameworks and you look at them, that you have the idea of a Shaykh or a spiritual teacher, a guide, which in the Arabic language means literally an older man. A Shaykh means an older man. So it can either be in a mundane sense, just mean like an elder, or in the context of the religious tradition, a scholar of the religion or a spiritual guide. Because we're importing these frameworks that, number one, are not English words, and number two, have different implications depending on the country that one is hailing from, and depending on the tradition that one studies in, a Shaykh, a Mufti, an Imam, an Ustadh, etc. There's really not normalcy for the American Muslim community at large in terms of these titles, right? So if you say in the context of academia, so-and-so is Dr. so-and-so, which means they're a professor, that means something. That's a very, very specific, clearly identified level of qualification based on the person's study or their writing, etc. Whereas when you say Ustadh, it kind of just means a teacher. So what you'll find amongst some of the Muslims in America who call themselves traditionalists is there's almost like this ranking, like Shaykh, Imam, Ustadh, and then you have this very ambiguous Sidi thing. The point being, there's no qualifying, there's not like an ombudsman that is like checking people out and then saying, okay, you deserve this title. So you'll find someone who studied for decades and decades, and that person may be called a Shaykh, or someone who's been in community service since literally before I was born, and that person's called Imam. But then someone else shows up on the scene and they've been putting in work for a couple months or a couple years, and all of a sudden they're a Shaykh or they're an Imam. So we see that there's not really normalcy. Our response to all of this is developing what we call mu'allifs. And a mu'allif is someone who's engaged in the process of reconciliation, who's for all intents and purposes a translator between the scholarship and the laity, between our leaders and the general mass or the general populace of the community, and are critically engaging both of those segments, and are borrowing from the scholars ideas and principles and their own spiritual development that will then enable them to properly, critically, and adequately serve the mass of the community. Mu'allif comes from the same word as ta'lif. Allafa, it means to bring two things together or to bind two things together. And in the context of the community, it means to bring hearts together, to create this process of conciliation. Part of what we're taking as a responsibility upon ourselves is to develop those people, to train those people, right? And it's beautiful that it's happening as many lanes on a highway. What's happening is Zaytuna College with the development of imams and scholars and thought leaders, that's one lane on the highway. What's happening where people are going overseas or they're engaged in rigorous study here at home, that's another lane on that highway. People who are just doing chaplaincy, that's another lane on the highway. People who are academics is a lane on the highway. All we're saying is that we have a very unique lane on that highway, and trying to create people who understand all of those roles, but are for all intents and purposes a hamzatul wasl, people who are able to bring those different people together, both by sharing best practices, but by this process of mutual service. Because if people don't understand that it's a lane, they may experience it as a lone highway. And I think that there is an interesting parallel in medicine, because you do have scholars of medicine that are training physicians, and then you have surgeons, and you have specialists, and you have people that are doctors training residents, and then you have people that are in residency, people who are in med school, people who are studying nursing, and you also just have people that are at the reception desk, and that's all they're doing. They're not a medical professional. And as a community, I think that we need to look at that parallel and to understand that we need all of those. We need all of those different levels, because frankly, the Muslim community, we have imams, we have shuyukh, meaning prayer leaders or community leaders, and we have scholars. But those people are not always engaged in the reality that the community is facing, especially when you're talking about converts and you're talking about the youth. And the qualified ones amongst them are way, way overworked and overburdened, out of time, out of bandwidth, if we're being honest. And the Muslim community has to wake up and realize that there's not like this group of 5 or 6 superheroes that are gonna save us. Right? This isn't Marvel Comics. This isn't the X-Men. Like, it's not going to be enough. Imam Siraj, Imam Zaid, Shaykh Hamza, Imam Zaid, Dr. Matson, etc., those people alone are not going to be able to do everything that the community needs to do. So we have to do 2 things. Number 1, increase the likeness of those people. Increase the number of people that are like them, that serve in that lane. And number 2, create a strong core and a broad-based, almost like a nationwide, worldwide network of people who understand what those people do and are assisting them on the ground by way of addressing the needs that can be met in the community before they get to the level of advanced scholarship, right? So again, and the chaplaincy programs and the things that are happening are very much like that. For Ta'leef, because the question we always get asked is, how can we do Ta'leef where we are? And the answer to that is, you can build a space, and we can tell you how to build a space, but making sure the right people are there to greet them when they come, that's gonna take training, that's gonna take development. So communities that wanna create these type of spaces need to invest in developing the human resources that are necessary to make sure that the magic happens when someone walks through the door. Those are people that are gonna be both the teachers, they're gonna be the volunteers, they're gonna be the person serving the tea. So that when someone comes to a community and someone says, Jeff or Terry or Sally or Juan or Carlos or whoever has questions about Islam, they'd like to speak to someone. It's not 1 or 2 people in the community. They can answer the basic questions, but it's 10 or 15. And I really, really believe that that's a big part of what our predecessors in American Islam wanted to do, was to make this affair accessible for people. And honestly, I really believe that's what the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, would want for this community, where we're no longer dealing with some confusing situation to where, like, as a convert, I'm confused. As a young Muslim who's trying to re-engage, it's so confusing. But where it's normal, it's natural, it's fluid, to the best of our ability. وَمَا تَوْفِيقِي إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ.